Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. Ramadan Mubarak to everyone. In the 9th Hijri century, Burhanuddin al-Biqa'i wrote his tafsir نظم الدرر في تناسب الآيات والسور. He took a new approach to classical interpretation, focusing on the unspoken relations between the verses and the surahs. Ever since, a new discussion has been occupying Quranic studies circles. How can we best understand and describe textual relations in the Quran? Authors who struggled to understand the connectivity system within the surah texts in the early days of European Quranic studies described the Quran with expressions such as lack of coherence and disjointedness. More recently, numerous approaches have emerged to try and address this issue. Their varied methodologies include rearranging the text, reinterpreting it, critically rereading the text in its historical context, or looking for a new approach altogether. I'm not going to name authors because most people here know the map of these approaches, and for the sake of time, obviously. While each approach works to some extent, they are not based on a theoretical framework or a model that analyzes how the Quran works as a piece of language. Some offer a systematic method of analyzing rhetorical structure and reach interesting descriptions of the structure and meaning. What they don't do, however, is be guided by the Quranic language itself, not just in finding the embedded structure, but in deducing a text-led description of how linguistic and discoursal strategies create a system governing textual relations in the entire text. Today, I would like to address this issue by redefining the expression disjointedness. So we may accept that the Quran is indeed composed of autonomous text units, a conclusion reached by analyzing the linguistic qualities of its sentences, verses, and longer units, but I will focus here on examples from Surah Al-Baqarah mainly. The subject of my discussion today is how to define this phenomenon, how it works in the Quran, and how it shapes its textuality. To avoid the negative connotations of the expression disjointedness, I decided against using it throughout the paper, although I worked with it for some time, and I suggest we use the notion of linguistic autonomy as a technical term, which I define based on the linguistic characteristics of autonomous Quranic text units. I use this definition as a starting point to develop a new linguistic approach. I propose a descriptive analytical model for studying Quranic textuality, informed by the findings of micro and macro analyses of Quranic examples. I begin by explaining briefly what textuality is from a text linguistics point of view. My discussion of examples will show how, despite its linguistic autonomy, the Quranic text displays many aspects of textuality, including coherence and cohesion. I will explain the function of linguistic autonomy as a text quality and how text elements, which I will call textuality tools, are utilized to maintain the text's integrity, thus continuing the perception of disjointedness, thus countering the perception of disjointedness created by linguistic autonomy. I dwell for a moment on the role of context in maintaining this integrity, because this will later be the basis of how we understand surah section relations. Next, I examine the presence of linguistic autonomy across Surah 2. I show how autonomy and connectivity work together at three text planes: the verse, the section, and the global context. I conclude by deducing some text building rules which I found to govern the expansion of text units in the surah. Finally, I summarize my model and how it may be used to analyze any part of the Quranic text. Textuality is the linguistic qualities and processes, or as a term used to refer to the linguistic qualities and processes by which a piece of language turns into a meaningful and coherent text. It involves 7 characteristics of the text. You see, I've color-coded them. The 2 red ones, cohesion and coherence, are at the center of the discussion of textual relations and tanasub al-suwar. The 4 blue ones are the ones that are enhanced by the quality of linguistic autonomy. And the black one, intertextuality, is the one that I will not discuss today. While the phenomenon has been observed and studied in Arabic, Persian, and Old Turkish literature, it has not been given enough attention in Quranic studies. Some علوم al-Quran works address this under various topics, including فواصل الآي, مقاطع الفاصلة, and الفصل والوصل. While knowledge of Arabic grammar and classical علوم is instrumental to understanding the Quran, the main perspective presented here is the intersection of contemporary Quranic studies and text linguistics. Let's have a look at the definition of linguistic autonomy and some examples. I call it linguistic because it is not explained in rhetorical or literary terms, and it's important to differentiate between these different approaches. It is a quality in the way the language is formed in all its aspects: grammar, meaning, and context. There are sound elements as well, but I'm not looking at these for the time being. The product of linguistic autonomy becomes part of a rhetorical or literary structure and can be understood and studied as such, but my primary concern here is how the language is used to produce text units that are then utilized for various communicative and aesthetic purposes. So, as you can see, the definition relies on 4 criteria. I will move to the next slide, actually. There are 4 criteria. If 4 of them exist, then we have a highly autonomous unit, highly linguistically autonomous unit. If 3 exist, we are still within highly autonomous units. But if 2 exist, it's somehow autonomous. If it's only 1, then it's not, but it features some elements of autonomy. If 0, then obviously it's attached to something else. It's not an autonomous unit at all. So if we focus again here on the criteria, I'll give you 2 examples. وَأَن تَصُومُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ, relevant to today's context, whether we're going to fast while we're traveling or break the fast. So we have the options, and we can use immediately a quotable and quick general statement, autonomous, out of its context, and apply it to our situation. So, وَأَن تَصُومُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ, I didn't personally fast because I used فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرَ. من كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخرى. So you can apply it outside the context. Why can we do this? Because these units have no syntactic dependence on their context. They stand alone as complete and independent units of meaning. They are conceptually universal. They express meanings that are globally acceptable, applicable, and they're pragmatically independent. They're not affected by their context. Some of their contexts are affected by them, but these incidents we're discussing here are not themselves affected by the context. They vary in length and textuality features. I have therefore divided them into types and given them some typical examples of each type in the following table. Those types may develop with further research into categories distinguished by various sets of textual features, but for now, we have 2 types related to each criterion. So for the first criterion, in terms of grammar or syntax, sometimes those independent units have cohesive ties, and sometimes they don't. In terms of, sorry, the image is very, very small. I can't see it on my screen. I hope you can see it here. Yeah. And in terms of criteria, the second criterion, it's about meaning. So sometimes they are thematically consistent with their context, and sometimes they are variant. When we say there's a topic shift here, and so on. I can move on. Okay. So let's look at. There are also typical examples in another table, but I will move to the function. So why are Quranic texts designed this way? Linguistic autonomy contributes to the Qur'an's textuality in several ways. A key factor here is quotability. Linguistic autonomy allows Quranic segments to be used outside their immediate context and in applicable but often unrelated situations. I'll give more examples in the next slide. But also, so the quotability is one factor, but the quotability has huge implications on textuality. As you can see, the blue points: informativity, acceptability, situationality, and intentionality. These four aspects of textuality are enhanced by the quotability result of linguistic autonomy. So, for example, informativity, the quotability allows circulation and reinterpretation of the verses or the segments in many different ways. In terms of acceptability, the audience recognition of the segments as effective and usable in their own context, in their own individual personal context, also enhances its acceptability. Situationality and intentionality are related because relevance of the quotability is an evidence of relevance in different contexts. And the fact that it's relevant in so many different contexts reinforces and in fact achieves the stated purpose of the Quranic text, the intentionality, which is to be hudan lin-nas, which is in fact in Surah 2. This, I hope, is more interesting than the past ones. These are examples of how quotability makes the Quran available in every day, makes the linguistically autonomous sentences available all the time with us every day. I had a pendant. You can't see it very well. It's not very clear because of the light. But I had a pendant, but I didn't bring it at the end. It had a piece of the Quran on it. But if we look at these here, the examples, they're clear on my screen. Linguistic autonomy allows parts of the Quranic text to be applied meaningfully at any time and place and be used and experienced in an unlimited personal and public situations. From the images, the one in the bottom left is a taxi. On the back of it says, "Ya bunayya irkab ma'ana wa la takum ma'al kafirin." So wittily inviting people to hire the taxi using the story from Noah, what Noah said to his son. Yes. And on the other hand, while words uttered by Moses Pharaoh made the news the other day, I don't know if anyone was following Egypt's news, as they were recently inscribed in gold on the walls of the current president's palace. So he wrote in the walls of his palace the words of Farāhī, أَلَيْسَ لِي مُلْكُ مِصْرَ وَهَذِهِ الْأَنْهَارُ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِي. So this way, even pharaohs can use quotable verses of the Quran. Quranic prayers are on pendants, and statements from Joseph's story are on the entrance of Cairo airport. "Udkhulu Misra insha'Allahu aminin." The first thing you see when you enter Cairo airport is a verse from the Quran, reassuring you that nobody will kidnap you or anything. "Udkhulu Misra insha'Allahu aminin." The shorter the text segment, the more memorable and quotable it is in daily situations. When linguistic autonomy in long segments occurs simultaneously with topic shift, it creates ambiguity in textual relations. This ambiguity allows the text of the Quran, allows textual relations to be open to interpretation. Al-Qur'anu hammalun dhu wujuh. Whether or not we can offer an interpretation of these relations with any degree of certainty, those autonomous segments make sense in their own right without the need to be attached to their immediate context. They can be recited in ritual prayers or written on wall hangings, book forwards, etc. Some are famously used by believers as popular personal prayers. They even have names of their own, such as Ayat al-Kursi, Quran 255, or Khawatim al-Baqarah, the last verse of the Quran, are very popular personal prayers for Muslims. After all, historically, this is the primary format in which the Quran was revealed and written. Autonomous contexts, independent passages, were memorized or inscribed on pieces of wood, leather, or stone, but each passage made sense alone. Let's look at how this applies in long surahs. Al-Baqarah. Oh, I'm going in the wrong direction. Okay. As a long text unit, Surah Al-Baqarah presents us with new questions about its complex textuality. For example, are sections also linguistically autonomous? If so, how can the relations between them be explained? And how could problematic topic shifts like suspensions, parentheticals, or transitional sections be explained in the light of linguistic autonomy? First of all, to test the presence of linguistic autonomy in the various text segments systematically and objectively, I created LAT. So LAT is the linguistic autonomy test through which you can put any piece of any segment of the Quran and apply the 4 criteria, and also have a description of its stylistic or linguistic qualities, and the arrows up and down showing to what extent it enhances or reduces textuality. This will impact, hopefully, the categorization, which I hope to develop further, but for now, it's just a description. And then you score it. So I scored in al-Insan ala fi khusr 3 out of 4. That's not a value-based judgment, that's just its level of linguistic autonomy. So it gets 3 because the context depends on it. So if you remove it from in al-Insan ala fi khusr, if you just use it as it is, and I've had it used in my personal life, then that's it. There's no hope for humanity. But in the context, the meaning changes. So this last criterion is to differentiate between what will not change outside context, like Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, or what will change in context. So you can give them different marks. You can do the same, by the way, for verses, for whole verses, and sections. Okay. So LAT, going back to LAT, is an analytical tool that helps us identify if linguistic autonomy exists in any Quranic segment, and its degree, determine its degree and type. Once the autonomous text segments have been identified, we need to establish their functions in relation to one another. This is expressed through the existing textuality devices and strategies and various planes of context they operate within. So there is an interplay between a linguistic autonomy and intensive use of cohesive devices and discourse strategies. Some of them were discussed today earlier in the first two papers. So you see cohesive type, anything in square bracket is in square bracket because in the further diagrams, you will see the square brackets. So that means link it to this slide. So these are just examples of type of textuality tools. And textuality tools is not the final term, that will also change, but for now it's just a working term. The methods, devices, and strategies, discourse dynamics that the text uses to create connectivity, countering the linguistic autonomy. Okay. And so textual relations across the surah are created by combining linguistic autonomy and textuality tools. You need micro and macro analyses working from sentence level up to the largest unit of meaning. Grammar and cohesive devices play the most significant role at the micro level. At the macro level, discourse strategies and dynamics are more prominent. All those dynamics take place in and across textual environments, which I describe as multiple layers of context. We've been looking at them already. So if you start from the sentence in the middle, the smallest unit, the context is determined by perspective. So if you look from the perspective of the smallest segment, which is the sentence, the wider context of the sentence is its local context, which is the verse or group of verses. It depends on what text you're looking, its size, and the grammatical relations that you find at the micro level of analysis. And then the context widens. So there's global section level, and surah level, and even the global Quran. The gray is the non-linguistic context. It's not gray because it's not important, it's just because I'm not looking at it this time, because I'm looking only at textual phenomena. And explaining the textual phenomena through the interaction between the text and the various levels of context. There are two main types of context, textual and... Oh, this is done already, I said this. So here is a quick example of the local context to make this tangible. But this expression, Wallahu wasi'un alim, or the statement, Allahu wasi'un alim, occurs 7 times in the surah. Once I said 7 times in the surah, what type of context is this? It's surah level context. It's a global context. It's going to be, surah level context is going to be a global context for anything because it's the widest level just before the whole Quran. So, but I'm not looking at the global level connectivity at the moment. So I will focus on the local context only. The table shows 3 occurrences in different verses. It shows the degree of linguistic autonomy, which is 4, the highest degree. It also shows the textual tools that connect the sentence to its local context. In each incident, we see connectivity through abstract inferential coherence relations, but also cohesive devices such as discourse markers and various lexical repetitions. Especially in the 3rd incident, in verse 247, the autonomous sentence shows a very high degree of connectivity with the local context expressed through 4 cohesive devices in the 4-word sentence. So every word is doubling up as a cohesive device. So let's now look at how this builds into larger text units. I used LAT to test the degree and type of autonomy in every sentence, then sections, then the section border verses in the surah. I conducted a verse-by-verse, sentence-by-sentence analysis of all verses, and the same level of analysis for all verses falling on section borders, because these are areas of disagreement, as well as an analysis of coherence and cohesion relations across verses and some sections. The general findings were, there is a heavy presence of autonomous sentences, there's a heavy presence of textuality tools within and across sentences and verses. Some types of narrative, like legal passages, contain more autonomous segments than others, like stories. Here is how the linguistically autonomous units are combined in verses. Linguistic autonomy occurs in so many patterns indicative of various sentential relations. To study and compare them would be an interesting subject for further research. This diagram shows a very small sample. So sentences are embedded or related. The wider circle in all of them is the ayah, and then the smaller blocks represent autonomous sentences. The one which is not in any block, وَقُومُوا لِلَّهِ قَانِتِينَ, should also be actually in a block. But in the next example, you will see ones which should not be in a block. This is an interesting pattern here, because in verse 257, the verse is composed of 3 autonomous segments, sentences. They all have the same grammatical structure, one autonomous sentence and an attached one. That's why the second sentence in each block is not within another box, because it's attached. It's not an autonomous sentence by itself. It's attached to the previous one grammatically. So Allah وَلِيُّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا يُخْرِجُهُم مِّنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ جملة حال. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَوْلِيَاؤُهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ يُخْرِجُونَهُم مِّنَ النُّورِ إِلَى الظُّلُمَاتِ أُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ هُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ. Exactly the same grammatical structure, but you can't move A and put it in place of C without loss of meaning. So, or B, if you can't reorder them without loss of meaning. Which is a note I'm making to say that autonomy is not opposite of coherence. It doesn't contradict coherence. So, autonomous versus form sections. Let us now look at how a section is built from small autonomous units of meaning. I have placed verses connected grammatically in separate blocks. As you can see here, 21 and 22 are connected grammatically. And each block contains verses connected grammatically. The third one doesn't have 2 verses because there's no grammatical connection between 25 and the next one. At the local level, the grammatical connectivity lasts for as long as the same topic does. This is very important to know, because that's how you will divide your text into segments, into small sections first. So once a topic once a new topic begins, a new grammatical relation will be introduced, sometimes accompanied with a change of discourse dynamics. So the grammatical relation holding 21 to 22 together and the pronoun dynamics changed when the topic changed in 23 and 24. Then the dynamics in 23, 24 changed again with a new slight topic shift in 25, and so on. I'll skip the rest of the analysis of this bit because we will see another analysis of it in the next slide. In other words, with each topic shift, no matter how small, there is an observable change in the connectivity tools. And I gave examples: grammatical pattern changes, pronoun dynamics change, and discourse markers change. I can give more details of this, but let's skip them for the sake of time. Textual connectivity devices and discourse strategies shape the text and also relations across contexts. Grammatical tools are utilized more at the immediate context level. As the text unit expands, we see less reliance on grammatical connectivity and more on discourse dynamics and devices. So a new subsection with a new topic will be accompanied with a change of addressee, for example, or a grammatical or change of grammatical subject, or the item or person spoken of. A whole new theme represented in what we see, what we now call a main section, would be introduced by a major discourse marker such as vocative ya or ya ayyuha ladhina, and so on. The change of pronoun dynamics and also often a change of discourse types, for example, from a list of instructions to historical narrative, which you see in Surah al-Baqarah. Different verses and sections have different roles in creating the text coherence and organizing textual relations across planes of context. Some connect immediate and local contexts, and some connect global contexts. Those functions overlap sometimes, and one segment may have both or more local and global context connectivity functions, as we have seen in Allah wasi'un alim, because it connects locally to the verse, but also connects globally by means of its repetition 7 times in the same surah. So let's see how this happens in the same example we discussed. So the first 3 blocks form together a local context. They're connected, each block is connected internally by grammar relations, but also has a theme. So the first one is Allah, or topic. Allah, disbelievers, believers. This is a local context. And then 26 to 27 connects to this local context by means of lexical repetition and offers an analogy that brings the 3 topics together. لا يستحي إن الله لا يستحي أن يضرب مثلا ما بعوضة فما فوقها. Believers, this will be the reaction. Unbelievers will be this reaction. This will be the reaction. So it brings together Allah and both different types of people. So it creates a wider section global context. And then there is a speaker comment in the final 2 verses. And how do we know that they are separate? Because they are grammatically connected, and the grammatically connected together and disconnected from the previous ones. And that gives you the wider section global context. Is this all? No. There are also connections between all of these and further context, cross-section, surah context, and Quran context. This is a small example, easy to explain, where 62 interrupts a historical narrative in 61 and 63. You can see with the highlight colors that the narrative is running with the same discourse marker, وَإِذْ in 61 and وَإِذْ in 63. But because there's a change, there's a shift of topic or focus, there's a change of discourse marker. There's also a change of grammatical pattern. We had verbs, past tense verbs in 61 and 63, but we have a nominal sentence in 62. This is not the only connectivity function of this verse. The reference to Christians in 63, also, I meant 62. The reference to Christians in 62 also connects globally by foreshadowing forthcoming verses such as 87, 89, and 81, all of which refer to Bani Israel's refusal to accept other scriptures including the Bible and the Quran. Although the Mufassirin link it to the Quran only, but I have other textual evidence to think it also refers to the refusal of Jesus' message. The whole verse also foreshadows forthcoming verses such as 136, asserting that all believers are equal in their faith in all the prophets. However, more complex cases have been the subject of much discussion by scholars working on this surah. When the interruption of a running theme expands over several verses falling mid-section, followed by a topic shift, bringing the reader back to the main topic of the section. So there's a running theme, then interruption, then back to the running theme, like we see in this example. But sometimes the interruption is not just one verse, sometimes the whole passage. In this case, it's called suspension. And other patterns have been referred to as transitional sections or hinges. Researchers find those interruptions challenging to explain, mainly because of their combination of linguistic autonomy and topic shift. This combination creates ambiguity immediately. And the segment relations, okay, thank you. The segment relations to the following segment are not clear. However, if we apply the same method of analysis and observe the changing textual connectivity tools and their interplay with those autonomous parts of the text, we can see that those sections connect the present theme and the section, and the present theme and the present section with the global context. They function as contextual links. What happens is, like with every topic shift, grammatical connectivity with the previous verse discontinues, and the new discourse pattern starts. This creates disconnectivity with local context, so there's an impression of lack of coherence or disjointedness. In contrast, when we analyze their thematic and linguistic contents, their lexical repetitions, their discourse and pronoun dynamics, etc., we see their connectivity with various global context levels, cross-section, surah, cross-surah, and overall Quran. Let us look at an example where Matthias Zanizer reached a similar conclusion. Zanizer argues that the verses 153 to 162 of the surah exemplify the Quranic practice of constructing a discourse where individual segments, though autonomous in their immediate message, interlock through subtle cohesive mechanisms to form a unified whole. My work here explains those cohesive mechanisms and shows that they are not necessarily subtle. They combine explicit and inferential elements, which we can explain by first, categorizing textuality tools based on their natures and functions, and second, conducting a methodological analysis of the local and global connectivities they create across text units. This diagram shows the layers of context linked by this section. It functions mainly as a contextual link at surah and cross-section level. So you see arrows going back and forth. In the middle, the verses of the section. So we have all layers of context here encompassed by the global Quran context, and you have the textual devices between the square brackets. What do they do? 153, 157 shares the topic of sabr and shares a grammatical connectivity all through. And it begins with استعينوا بالصبر والصلاة. What does it connect with? Those familiar with the surah will know the other verse. So this is cross-section connectivity, because this is a verse in another section which begins with استعينوا بالصبر والصلاة. This one is interesting. 158 is on al-Hajj. It connects both ways, backwards to the story of Abraham when he built the Kaaba and prayed and asked God, أرنا مناسكنا. And it also connects with al-Hajj wal-Manasik, the prayer was answered in 196 to 200, the details of the Hajj ritual. And so on. I'll skip because I've been given a firm warning. So therefore, I propose we stop calling these sections, these interruptions, all these names, transitional, hinge, suspensions. They are mainly contextual links. Each time contextual links occur, they give the reader access to the broader section or surah Quran context. Relevance theory explains how this process works at a cognitive level. Contextual links are not just superficial physical devices. This is important because we all talk about lexical repetitions or repetition of this or repetition of that. It's not just a superficial repetition, but they provide access to an ever-expanding contextual and cognitive environment where existing information is modified by newly added information. And new information is continuously introduced to provide access to context within which we can interpret the meanings of the text. So it's like a cycle. This process forms gradually growing conceptual environment that expands as more contextual information is added. In the case of the Quran, this information is in the form of linguistically autonomous units. And the direction they give us are in the textual tools, which include whole verses and long segments functioning as contextual links. The recurrence creates this complex pattern of textual relations across the surah, which I will refer to as the surah's texturality, or the Quran's texturality, as opposed to textuality. Shuruq Najib, when we discussed Al-Mujadila and its all surah context, suggested we borrow this term from literary theory. But today I'm focusing on its linguistic use. In their seminal work, Cohesion in English, Halliday and Hassan introduced the concept of texture in the sense of the network of cohesive devices that bind the text into a unified whole, which essentially describes how coherence is achieved in the text. Other linguists use the term as well, but I will add to these two aspects the broad and diverse range of discourse dynamics utilized by the Quran, so not just cohesive devices, but a range of discourse dynamics that create intertextual and contextual connectivity. So my analysis led to describing the system as a complex texture of interwoven local and global thematic relations. Contextual texts run vertically, contextual links run vertically through a horizontal sequence of surahs, themes, and topics to keep autonomous units connected as one global context. And like the variety of textures you see in this image here, each section or unit will vary, whether it's a verse or a small section or a main section. It will vary in theme, in topic, in length, and the textual tools it employs, and the frequency and patterns of global contextual links it includes. The fact that they are built by combining linguistically autonomous units gives them this flexibility. And the use of contextual connectivity tools, as described above, gives the combinations of autonomous units their texturality. And now we reach 4 text building rules that I deduced from all this work. I'll go around them very quickly. Small disjointed units build long disjointed ones. Rule 2, change of theme, change of language. Rule 3, interruption creates contextual connectivity. So when you're analyzing your long surah, when you meet these interruptions, expect contextual connectivity and try to interpret it in this light. It might make better sense. And rule 4, each unit is unique, but is built in the same way. To conclude, let me introduce to you LATA. LATA is short for linguistic autonomy and texturality analysis, which I developed from analyzing Quranic segments such as those discussed today. It explains how segments of the Quran work to form meaning and textuality. LATA provides the analyst with analytical tools and methods to analyze any part of the Quran, long or short. To apply LATA, you need one or more of its 3 parts, depending on the goal of your analysis. First, the linguistic autonomy criteria, use it to determine the basic text units. Not yet. And second, Quranic texturality tools, use them, conduct a micro-analysis of text units to identify the devices and strategies that create their textual relations. And third, text building rules, explain how the text is constructed using 1 and 2. Thank you for listening.